William Peters is the founder of the Shared Crossing Project, whose mission is to raise awareness and educate people about the profound and healing experiences that are possible for the dying and their loved ones. As the director of the Shared Crossing Research Initiative, William and his team collect and study extraordinary end-of-life experiences and are recognized as the world's leading authority on the shared death experience. William, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome.
Thanks, Lisa. Glad to be here.
Many people are familiar with the concept of NDEs, or near-death experiences, but less is known about shared death experiences. So let's start out by defining what that even means. What is an SDE?
Yes, so a shared death experience occurs when there's somebody dying and a loved one, caregiver, and in some cases, just a bystander, reports that they feel like they shared in the transition or the arrival and the initial stages of the afterlife with the dying. In a sense, they accompany the dying through this great transition from this human existence into what lies beyond.
All right, perfect. I think that's a great way to start out. At least we've got a foundation laid out. But why don't you tell us, what is it that led you to begin the Shared Crossing Project?
So there's a personal side to this and a professional side. The personal side, like so many of us who work in end of life, we always feel like we're kind of dragged into our professions here. I had a near-death experience, my first near-death experience at 17 years old. So it was a high-speed skiing accident in Squaw Valley, crushed my spine, and was catapulted out of my body. And it was a full-blown SDE, sailing away through the rib tunnel, life review, went into the light. Unlike a lot of SDEers, I pled to come back. I was really clear that I had more work to do here. And so I argued with God, if you will, to come back. And so I did. And, it didn't seem to change my life in any demonstrable way initially. But it did lead me later in life into a lot of, I worked in the third world, worked in war zones in Peru and Guatemala, and ended up working in the AIDS epidemic in San Francisco. So really had a lot of encounters, up close encounters with death and dying. I should also say I had a second near-death experience about 10 years after that, where my blood counts went off. And I had a rare blood disease, idiopathic thrombocytopenia, and I found myself in the ICU floating above my body for somewhere between 2 and 4 hours. So I was really clear at that point as I was watching the medical staff attend to me and others in the ICU that I am not this body. Whatever I am clear that I have a consciousness, a sense of me that is not connected to this body. So with those experiences, I got really interested in death and dying, and found myself a few years later working in hospice, Zen hospice in San Francisco. And it was there, as I attended to many, many, patients dying, that I saw all these phenomenal end-of-life experiences with pre-death dreams and visions, and these things called terminal lucidity. People like coming into full vitality just as they're about to die. And then and I also had my first profound shared death experience there, and I think I'll just share that right now because so germane, is that there I am just reading a gentleman a book, and he is very close to death, reading him a story. I remember the story. It was a Jack London story, something about the Iditarod, and called The Wild. And he loved these stories, and all of a sudden I popped out of my body, and I was suspended with Ron, we'll call him Ron. I was looking at my body and Ron's body in the physical form. He was in bed and I was sitting in a chair. And then I noticed he was right up next to me, suspended in this we call this a co-out-of-body experience. And he was acknowledging that I was there, and almost with a sense of smugness, almost like, check this out, William. So with that was my kind of initiation into shared death experiences, although I didn't know what they were. There was no term for them at this point. So going into the professional side of it, I worked as a psychotherapist, and increasingly my work was gravitating towards end of life, helping people prepare for death and dying. I've worked with a lot of people with terminal illnesses, and I just saw immense amounts of suffering as people were dying and their loved ones were suffering, the helplessness, the hopelessness. Of course, on the flip side, there's the grief and bereavement for the surviving loved ones. But it was in 2011 that I met Raymond Moody, and he was introducing the term shared death experiences. And when I heard him talk about it, I just lit up and said, oh my, I know all about this. And he was saying, I talked to him at depth, and he was very supportive in me starting a research project. He says, we don't know much about this. If you've got the interest, then go do it. And so the real reason I got into it was I love the phenomena. It's amazing, but they are so healing for people. When you have a shared death experience, your grief is completely different. You have a sense of connection with your loved one that feels eternal. People come back from a shared death experience much the way they come back from a near-death experience, with a renewed understanding for the purpose and meaning of life. And so I wanted to give this to people. So that's how I got into this.
Wow. You're blowing my mind here, because the things you're talking about are things that I've experienced, and I had no idea that this is what we're talking about. I just thought, Lisa's a little crazy. But we'll get back into that. First, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the Shared Crossing Research Initiative, which you started. Tell us a little bit about that, and maybe share a little bit more about what you've learned about SDEs.
We decided we really have to document this experience. We have to collect SDE accounts. We have to deeply interview people, and we have to understand how these different SDEs present. So we came up with the first typology. I should say, I had the typology back in 2013, 2014, but we needed to back it up with research, really test it. So I brought in a really spectacular researcher, Dr. Michael Kinsella, and he put up all the real rigorous research standards and processes. And so we had 165 accounts. That means 165 different accounts, but they came from 107 people. So right away, you realize something, and that's 41% of our SDE experiencers were having more than one. So that right away tells us something. It suggests, well, there maybe someone has a proclivity to this, and we call this an experiencer prone. In other words, they have a capacity to have these, and so I'm one of these people. So I've had a number of these, so I know one when I see one. But this is something we'll talk about perhaps a little bit later. But the typologies we created, and this is what we learned, was that there are two basic types of SDEs. One happens at bedside, and this is what Raymond Moody's work, his book, In Glimpses of Eternity, his research there. All of them are bedside. But we realized there was another type of SDE, and it's a remote. That means it happens when you're not at the bedside of a loved one. Well, our research found that 64% were remotes, and 36% were bedside. So there's something there that's like, that just really kind of turned the field upside down a bit, because while people knew about these experiences, researchers had seen these experiences, they had never really made the correlation that they're more often occur remotely. We also have a subset of the remote, we call it a flyby. And that's a very brief, fleeting visit. The experiencer says, I was just, waking up in the morning, or I was just doing the dishes, or I was driving, and this loved one came to me, appeared, let me know that he or she was okay, and then left. And it's so profound that the people will stop what they're doing and make a phone call to see what happened to, Aunt Susie. So, but that's just another type. And then just to say the subtypes we have, really important for listeners to know this. Sometimes people will say, well, I had one of these like a day before my loved one died, or like a couple hours after the person died. And we say, oh yeah, we see that a lot. We call this a variation in time And they can happen early, they can happen late, usually not more than a few hours, at most a couple days, but they have the exact same pattern. And so we also have multi-person SDEs, fascinating when people can be having them, one person can be bedside, another loved one can be, across the country, and they can have an SDE. It can be even different phenomena. So one way to look at the basic phenomena of the SDE is that it's identical from what we can tell in range of features to the NDE. So the near-death experience and the shared death experience have very similar, if not identical, features. And this is why Raymond Moody got into the research on the shared death experience, because he was presenting on near-death experiences, and then people would say, hey, Raymond, you're talking about a near-death experience, but I was caring for my grandmother, and I had something very similar. So that's how he collected his cases initially, over a few decades. So that's basically, that's how we break them down. If you were asking, we have one other typology, I'll state it briefly, and there's 4 ways in which an experiencer will say that they're participating in this shared death. One is they're just, a remote away from the dying, and they sense the experience of the dying. That's about a quarter of our cases. Other people will witness phenomena. That's the most common, whether they're remote or at bedside. 84% of our participants talked about seeing what we call, death-related phenomena. So seeing the deceased or the dying, seeing their image, seeing them as they're transitioning. That's the most common. We also see the light, an amazing luminous light. They also talk about spectacular energetic experiences, like their body lights up or they see colors. They also talk about seeing other, might be, beings of light. They call them entities that seem to be somehow related to the dying process. And then we also see a boundary in which is very similar to the NDE. They'll talk about coming to a boundary, and they'll also see other deceased relatives that they recognize as friends or loved ones of the departing. So really, like I said, that's the witnessing of phenomena. And then the accompanying the dying is another way that an experiencer would say this. And the accompanying is different in the sense that when you can observe phenomena, but when you actually accompanying the dying, you're going with them, moving through the tunnel, ascending, sometimes like watching, but also going up and watching them discuss what's going on with spirit guides or what have you. And then the last one we see, which we don't see very much of the time, but when we hear it, it's profound. It's 5% of our cases. It's when the dying seems to be called in to guide the dying in the transition. And sometimes the experiencer will say, I had no idea why it was even there, but then the knowledge just came to me about how to help my mother transition. And then they'll talk about, carrying them. Oftentimes they go across a few thresholds, like maybe up a ladder or across a river. The main motif of the shared death experience is journey. It's a journey. So like you see, it's a journey and it's progression. So when you're guiding or accompanying, you are participating in this journey of transition. So yeah, that's our typology. That's what our research has really gleaned thus far. I think this may be a good time to show that video because I know I've talked a fair amount, but when you see this video of Cynthia, once you see it, I'll point out some of the features that we have that help people understand the mechanics of this.
So I remember lifting up out of my form, my body, and then taking my husband, his name was Shar, by the hand and pulling him up. And then and then I pulled him up past me, and then he pulled me up past him, and we kept doing that for a long time. I don't really know. So a lot of stuff was probably going on that I don't know about. And the sensation was very freeing. He was fully intact. He wasn't mentally compromised then. There was no sensation of constraint or discomfort from anybody's body. And then I saw the light. I almost feel corny saying that, but I saw the light, and it's not like a pinpoint light. It's it's huge light, and I told him that, look, there's the light, and we both turned towards it and went towards it, and then his mother appeared, and in the experience of the light, there was a complete wholeness sensation for me. A lot of freedom was in that. A lot, any of my own psychology wasn't there. None of that was there. It was just that opportunity to experience that. And then his mother reached to him, and then he reached to her, and he looked. He was still holding my hand, and he looked back at me and said, "But I want to stay with you." And then he slipped away. And I think that was it. I don't remember too much after that.
So in Cynthia's case, what you see right away here is that she is at the bedside of her partner. And just to be really clear, her partner his name is Shar, and he was dying. He was dying, and he actually had Alzheimer's and had chosen voluntary stopping of eating and drinking. So this was a very well managed end of life experience, in the sense that she was aware he was dying. He had chosen this, but like I said, they essentially went into starvation. And so this is how he transitioned. And what you'll see is that she's actually accompanying him. So that falls into the second and third type. The second mode of participation is that observing or witnessing phenomena. So you see the phenomena she sees. She sees it's kind of a co-experienced out of body experience. There's also ascension. Ascension is one of the major features we see. The light. She even says, she's actually quite a scientific person, and she said I feel a little corny talking about the light. And then she sees her mother-in-law, Shar's mother, there to greet him. It's a lovely exchange. And we call this the handoff. We often see the SDE experiencer handing off their loved one to a loved one on the other side. And she also talks about this point of no return. This is, what we refer to as the boundary in the spirit realm. It's also known in the near-death experience literature. And she realizes that, Shar is going on and she is not going on. She's going to come back to Earth, and what she does quite rapidly. So there's a real wonderful, very, very clear SDE. And I hope that is helpful to all of you as listeners.
Thanks for listening. Check out Castle Gate, a novel based on my own ancestral healing journey, at lisabonis.com. In 1921, 4 men set off from Scotland to the United States. Will Garrock, his brother Pete, his son Willie, and his nephew Thomas, all coal miners. They left behind the miners' rows and the nationwide mining strike with its soup kitchens. Their destination was Castlegate, Utah, where they had kin to welcome them before sending for their wives and children. They prospered in America, working in one of the finest mines in Utah. Until that tragic day, March 8th, 1924. Disaster struck. 3 explosions, trapping 171 men inside. Rescue crews worked tirelessly for days, but sadly, they could not save a soul. Women were widowed and children were orphaned, and some never recovered from their broken hearts. Castlegate is the true and tragic saga of a Scottish family whose dreams of finding their fortunes in the bountiful coal mines of Castlegate, Utah during the Prohibition era explode in one of the most devastating mine disasters in American history. Learn more at lisabonnace.com.